Hi everyone, thank you Waveney for introducing me, and yeah, I'm Daniel Spiegelman. I run the Purple Cloud Institute, and I'm also doing a master's at the moment on Yangsheng, or the nourishing life culture in China, which I think is really interesting to me because it's really a place where there is a lot of this interplay between Taoism and medicine and philosophy and all these kinds of things. And I don't think it really makes it into a lot of the Chinese medical training we get, especially in school. So for me, you know, if we're treating disease, it's really good to also know what is health, and especially what is health from a Chinese perspective, and looking at these texts can really illuminate that for us. The book I'm looking at for my master's is something called the Zunsheng Bajian, which is kind of an anthology of this Yangsheng literature. It's from the Ming Dynasty, but it incorporates a lot of texts much earlier than the book itself. And I realized when I was working out where these texts came from, this was one of the big texts in the Zunsheng Bajian. It's quite a mouthful, so there's a lot of text in this talk will be quite a mouthful. I'll talk about it a little bit, but the thing that fascinates me the most about it is this idea of animal organ spirits, which sort of enter the Chinese medical literature and the Daoist philosophies at this time. And they sort of carry on through till today. Many Qigong practices use them. We'll talk about how they enter the literature later on. One of the things really interesting is they kind of have their origins in shamanism, way back when, like thousands of years BC, when people would imitate these animals in order to understand them. And, you know, if we think we have a tribe and we have a shaman in our tribe, and the shaman is imitating and understanding these animals, it's a big boost to our hunting skills, because you understand the movements of the animals, their behaviors, this kind of thing. And, it's been theorized that that's when it kind of enters into humanity. So these sorts of animal imitation practices have a long history, and we'll see some of that. You know, like later on in China, we have Huatuo's 5 animal frolics, these kinds of practices. And I should mention that a lot of the work on this, there's a few scholars who've worked on this, but one called Jia Jinhua, who did a lot of work on this text specifically. I've used her work quite a lot, so I thought I'd reference it at this time. So we're going to talk, who is Hu Yin? Hu Yin is the person who wrote the text. We can name it, the diagrams for the tonification and drainage of the 5 Zang and 6 Fu from the inner landscape of the yellow court scripture. Quite a mouthful. And this yellow court scripture is something we'll get into a bit later, but we'll talk about who was Hu Yin, who wrote this text. She was a Tang Dynasty scholar, and it was written about 848 CE. She was a Daoist priestess, and this is her name, her sobriquet, otherwise known as Woman of the Plain, Su Nuzi. And it's been said that this Su can be a reference to the Su Wen, so it could be explaining to us that she had great knowledge of the Huangdi Neijing. She lived on Mount Taibai, and it's most likely the Taibai in Shanxi, where Sun Timiao also practiced, the famous sort of Taoist. Well, he was a famous medical doctor, but also drew on Taoism quite a lot, and she was obviously quite influenced by his works. These books are documented as early on as the Song Dynasty, as she was existing, but the book itself comes from the Daoist canon, which is a Ming Dynasty version. This Daoist canon, that's the illustrated version, and we'll be looking at the illustrations later on. There's another version, which is also in the Daoist canon, the 10 books on the cultivation of perfection, and that doesn't contain any illustrations. And this is a quote from her. She says, "I, Hu Yin, am not quick by nature and loved the mysterious gate at a young age." This mysterious gate is an allusion to Taoist practice, Taoist meditation. "I have cultivated my mind in non-intervention and settled my heart in simplicity." And we move on. "I have read the marvelous theory of the yellow quartz scripture, the Huangtingjing, and investigated many of the writings on the bamboo slips. I have studied the subtleties diligently over many, many years and humbly found the old charts are profound and secret, and the paths are dark and deep. The words and theories are mysterious, so that few people could delve into them. They pointed to the forms and images, or merely summarized the names of the spirits. Many authors composed works and different arguments emerged. This situation caused later learners to be unable to find the gate. When a slight error occurred, the mistake could become a huge one. Now, with my knowledge, I dare to search through all opinions and discourses and draw different images based on all the scriptures. So we can see here, she's innovating, she's creating these images at this time. They really didn't enter into the framework until this text. I first illuminate the viscera and then discuss cultivation and practice. So here she's outlining the structure of the text. I trace the origin of disease and apply breathing exercises to eliminate them. I also list medicinal principles, Daoyin, gymnastic exercises, the observation of symptoms, and seasonal food taboos. I hope later learners will be able to see the 6 circumstances when they look at the images and know clearly the myriad of things when they read the scripture. So she's described it briefly here, but we'll look briefly at the structure of the text. So there are separate sections for each of the 5 Zang Fu organs, plus the gallbladder. Now the gallbladder is a very unusual addition of the Fu, and I'll talk about that probably more than any of the other Zang organs, because it is quite confusing. She has an image of each of the individual organ spirits. That's a mistake. There is no names in this text. The names are in different related texts. There is a description of each organ according to the 5-phase theory related to the Huangdi Neijing, and there's some anatomy in there as well. Not all of the anatomy is completely accurate by modern standards, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good, especially given the time in the Tang Dynasty. There's a section on disease diagnosis, disease criteria. There's a herbal formula for each organ. The only one I've been able to recognize so far is Shenqi one, which is affiliated obviously with the kidneys. All of the other ones are similar in construction to those found in Sun Tzu Miao's work, but I've not been able to track any of them down, so I'm working on the assumption that she invented them, or possibly was passed them on in her Daoist tradition. There are visualization meditations for each organ, and these are very much focused on her Shangqing Taoist practices. They involve 5-phase theory and were done specific times of the year, seasonal times of the year, facing directions according to 5-phase theory, and clacking the teeth, swallowing saliva, and visualizing various colored qi entering the body. There are breathing techniques for each organ. These are based on the 6 breath system, which is very, very old, much older than her, maybe 1,000 years older than her. There's mention of them in the Zhuangzi of, these breathing sounds, not a complete system, in the Ma Wangdui manuscripts. She changes, and this was a system that developed over time, she's changed them slightly, so she's able to fit the gallbladder into the system. There's Daoyin exercises, and Daoyin, for anyone who doesn't know, is similar to modern Qigong, but in a way also, when you actually look at these exercises, there's a clear influence from yoga. Her exercises specifically, she takes, Sun Tzu Miao has a number of these, he calls them the Indian method of stretching, or Indian method of stretching, it's massage, but by it they mean stretching or Daoyin. And she's taken some of these as well and sort of changed them a little bit. But if you're trying to visualize what these exercises are, there is quite a bit of overlap with Indian sort of yoga exercises. And there are also seasonal food prohibitions and recommendations based on each organ. Also the 5 flavors. So for example, we talk about spring. The acrid flavor is prohibited because that would exacerbate the sort of seasonal qi, and for the same reason in autumn, the bitter flavor, which is descending in nature, is prohibited because according to the 5-phase theory, in autumn there is already that descending seasonal chi in the atmosphere, and we don't want to contribute to it. So that's a little breakdown of the text, but we'll be focusing in this talk on the organ spirits. I'd love to focus on more, but I realized I certainly do not have enough time. So these are some of the influences of the text. We have the yellow quartz scripture, the Huangting Jing, which is mentioned in the name of the text. And yeah, we'll discuss this in quite a bit of detail later work, but it's one of the earliest sort of Daoist texts. The Huangdi Neijing, we've already mentioned some of it. The five-phase theory, both the Suwen and Lingshu, you can see influences from both of these books in the work. This the Yangsheng Yenming Lu, which is it's how did I translate this? Records concerning cultivating nature and nourishing life, attributed to Tao Hongjing. Now, Tao Hongjing is a very interesting figure. He is a bit of a polymath. He adapted a lot of different things. He was an elite in society. He was effectively the founder of the Shangqing movement of Taoism, but he was also very much a medicinal doctor. And yeah, this book itself deals with breath work, fasting, Dao Yin exercises, food taboos, many of the same topics as Hu Yin's work. We have the Fu Xingjue here, the supplementary formulas for the essential medication of the viscera. It's also attributed to Tao Hongjing, but likely written by his students. And yeah, it's not recorded in any other documents, but it was found in these Dunhuang, the manuscripts found in the Dunhuang caves. Sun Tzu Miao's work, we've already discussed a bit of that. And this, the next one, the Zhubing Yuan Ho Lun, is the first text really that emerged, Sui Dynasty text, emerged focused on disease classification. So there's no herbal or acupuncture theory in this at all, but there are a lot of these Dao Yin exercises as therapeutic prescriptions. And they're similar in nature to what Hu Yin uses. I need to look into more and see exactly what she took from this text, but they're definitely of the same flavor. And also Hu Yin's own Shangqing Taoist practices. And there are, as I mentioned, her own innovations and medical experiences she's added into the text. So some of this theory can't be found anywhere else. So we'll talk a little bit about Shangqing Taoism, highest clarity Taoism. So it comes from these manuscripts which were collated by Tao Hongjing, who we've mentioned before. They were received from transmission from a guy called Yangsheng. He received them in a meditative state from this Lady Wei, Wei Huazun, who is said to have received them in a meditative state from all these immortals who came and visited her while she was meditating. So she's the foundation, the story goes, of these manuscripts that later became Shangqing Taoism. We also have the Huangting Jing, which is a big part of it, but probably came from somewhere else and was sort of factored into the corpus of literature and affiliated with Shangqing Taoism. They were based around Maoshan, which is in contemporary Jiangnan in China. And yeah, it's a really interesting area because, even in the Ming Dynasty, the work I'm working on, the Zunsheng Baijian, similar area. And there's Ge Hong lived there. There's a big affiliation with Taoism in this area. And we have this loose affiliation of doctors called the Wenbu Pai, the School of Tonification and Warming, and doctors such as, what's his name, Zhang Yuebin? Yeah. And they all lived in this area and sort of mixed medical theory up with the Daoist practices. This school has a big emphasis on the kidneys, which is, tonifying the kidneys, warming the kidneys, which is a big sort of Daoist theory. So there's this overlap between Daoism and medicine that goes on in this region. So it's really fascinating. And it was also a place where had this native sort of Wu shamanistic practices, and then the original Daoists, and by that I mean the people who first called themselves Daoists. So this is long after Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi and these sort of people. The people who self-identified as Daoists were Tianshi Taoism, the celestial master Taoism. They came down from the north and they sort of mixed with the Wu shamanistic practice, and sort of there's this syncretic amalgamation of both these practices that became Shangqing Taoism. There's an earlier tradition as well called Taoist Taoism, which is like greater clarity, and they were very focused on alchemical practices, so external alchemy, which is boiling up minerals, all of this kind of thing, a lot of poisonous sort of metals, making all these funky concoctions, drinking them, sometimes dying, all this kind of thing. Shangqing's name is like a reference to them. It's kind of like a bit of a diss. They're saying, oh, you guys are greater clarity, but we're the greatest clarity. So they're saying we're better than you guys, and they look down on this external alchemy as something a bit lower, and they really focused on these visualization meditative practices. Now, these did exist in Taoism before, and Tai Ching, yeah, they meditated as well, but this is the pinnacle of practice in Shangqing Taoism were these kind of visualization practices we'll look at later. And they had a bit of they were quite well positioned in society by the 5th century and became the #1 school of Taoism for, about 500 years or so. So the Yellow Court Scripture, it is one of the earliest Taoist texts, and it's frequently recited and quoted by many later Taoist texts. And we'll see today, I should have mentioned before that there will be a practical component to this lecture. I spent a year full-time, but about a year in a Taoist temple, many years in China, but a year living in a Taoist temple. And one of the exercises I was taught there was a visualization practice that directly relates to this text and relates to the organ spirits we're talking about today. So it's still in play. It's like people still really, really respect this work. The story goes it was transmitted to Lady Wei, but it's a bit different to the other Shangqing texts. So they say it was a different teacher who gave it to her, but, we don't know. It's likely it came in somewhere else and was subsumed by the Maoshan tradition. There are mentions of both an internal and external version of this text. It's been suggested the external version is shorter and the internal one is longer. It has names of the spirits, which is what is involved in the practice I was taught, these spirit names. And yeah, it's suggested that this internal version is a later development from the external one. And yeah, it might seem a bit weird to be, summoning organ spirits or whatever into your body, but it's not as crazy as it might sound. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but in depth. But this idea of focusing on an area of your body and, with all your intention and your consciousness and filling it with something that's positive, it's really harnessing the power of placebo. I think it's if you wanted to look at it at this sort of analytical, rational perspective, it's really harnessing the power of placebo. But I think these images and these kinds of things, they work on a level that it kind of supersedes. It's much older in the human experience than this literary, rational mind, and it works on this very, very deep level of the body. And yeah, I think they were really onto something, and it can really encourage healing, this kind of visualization. You're focusing on part of your body and associating it with, macrocosmic, planetary kind of symbols. It's really a symbolic language, and I believe this mythological and language of symbolism is it's a big part of the human experience. I think much more so than rationality and the rational mind. I think we've lost touch with that in the modern era. But I think bringing these things into the body, we get this association of the human being as being part of a cosmic order and this kind of thing, and that's a big part of the Shangqing practices. One commentary on the Yellow Quartz scripture talks about the heaven, man, earth, Tiandi Ren, being connected in the human body with the brain, the spleen, and the heart. The spleen being very big, it being the spleen, the kidneys being very, very emphasized in this text, and the heart as well. And the spleen, of course, being referencing, it's one of the yellow quartz in the body. There are 13 deities mentioned in the text, 7 in the face, 6 in the Zang organs, and 1 in the gallbladder. And they're not animals here. We're told the kidney spirit rides a turtle, the lung spirit rides a white tiger, the liver spirit rides a dragon, but they're like human kind of human figures, often children. We're visualizing this kind of thing. And it was later developed by Hu Yin into this full system of animal spirits, a lot of them associated with sort of cosmological stars, planets, this kind of constellations, that kind of thing. And in this practice where you're taught to actually really visualize the internal organs. So you want to sort of get your mind in. It's kind of this Neguan. I think I was in Zhongxian Wu's lecture yesterday, and I think he mentioned that as well. The inner vision. So you're really developing that kind of inner vision and ability. They talk about seeing your internal organs, which is, pretty amazing. And these deities in this, these are the names of all the organ spirits. Can look through them, but we'll come back to them later. And they have very evocative names. This is the kind of bodily spirit practice we're talking about. They're conceived of as like inhabiting various organ spaces, and they'll sort of come and go. But the idea is that if they depart for too long, you'll get sick. And there'll be health issues, and they can be brought back into the body through these visualization meditative practices. And I believe these images, they convey a great deal of information in just one image. I really think that this is how humans saw the world before the development of, the Enlightenment and rational science and all of this kind of thing. It's a big part in every culture. It's you look at, Roman mythology, early Christian mythology, they see the world in very similar ways because humans respond to symbolic language. I mean, Chinese medicine is full of metaphor. Everything's a metaphor for something. It's very similar. The humans have an innate understanding, and it's an innate way of communicating a huge amount of information in a single symbol. I mean, I don't know, if you wanted to write out everything that one of these symbols was related to or explain, you'd probably have several books, but there's so much encoded in this information. Now we have the Taiping Jing, which is a precursor to the Huangting Jing. And they have all these images of body gods to aid in meditation. You were meant to paint them in front of you in a sunlit meditation room and sort of meditate on them. And there are some 5-phase correspondences going on in there. Statement from that: these spirits naturally and always dwell in empty and peaceful places, not in troubled places. So the idea is that if you've got an organ issue, these things are going to exit your body. And it also states, if the spirit of the liver is gone or is away frolicking, the eyes are without light. If the spirit of the heart remains absent, the nose no longer communicates. If the spirit of the kidneys leaves and remains absent, then the ears are deaf. If the spirit of the spleen leaves and remains absent, the human mouth will no longer taste sweetness. So we see this correspondence between the sort of external corresponding orifices of the body and the organs and the spirits. We have this book, the Lao Tzu Zhongjing, which is very interesting because it sort of puts all these body gods into a kind of very bureaucratic alignment, which is very Chinese. Everyone has sort of a position, a bureaucratic position, and is conceived of in this way. The Dadong Zhenjing is that's what's depicted here, and these are all deities related to the planet Mars. Someone's sort of imagining and bringing into their body, and they have it for all kinds of planets and stars. And we're told if one can nurture the spirits, he will not die. The spirits refer to the spirits of the five viscera. The liver contains the hun, and the lungs contain the pole. The heart contains the spirit, the spleen contains the consciousness, and the kidneys contain the essence and will. And if all the viscera are injured, then the spirits leave. And we can see here kind of reference to sort of immortality kind of training by nurturing these spirits in the body. Yeah, and many of these sort of involved astral travel, cosmic travel. A lot of the time with the Big Dipper, and that's what we can see here. This is from the illustrated instructions of visualizing the 3 ones in the 5 phases of the Big Dipper. And what's happening here is at the 8 nodes of the year. So at the starts of the 4 seasons and the equinoxes and the solstices, you do these sort of practices and, visualize yourself traveling up to the stars. This one I really like. It's the jade text of flying high on the right-hand side. And you're kind of bringing each individual, this is from a bit later, from the Song dynasty, so after Hu Yin wrote, but you're kind of bringing each star into a specific organ. So we can see the first one, the heart, and then into the lung, and then the liver, then the spleen, the stomach, the kidneys, and the eyes. So you're really bringing each star and associating it with an organ. In the lower right-hand side, we have it from the method of reclining the dipper, where you'd kind of lie back on a mat with all the stars on you, and this map of stars, and sort of let them sort of come into your body. And these are sort of the Big Dipper deities in the upper left-hand side. Oh, and this is interesting. So we can see she was part of a long tradition that involved these sorts of practices. And this is a quote from Tao Hongjing, and it's interesting because I think he's got a similar idea to Hu Yin here, that he's bringing the idea that the first stage of this kind of Taoist practice is a medical one, that you need to get healthy, and this relates to his own condition. I think he was told this by an immortal, that he needed to fix his health before he could pursue this path of spiritual progression. So the first stage is healing yourself, and he does this with the Dao Yin exercises and medications like herbal medicine. And Hu Yin says, if I'm able to visualize the spirits, care for and nurture the viscera, restrain myself and make vigorous efforts, I will complete the Tao. So yeah, we can see this relationship between organ health and Taoist training, Taoist and spiritual aspiration, really. Then the viscera become strong. All poisons cannot encroach, even though rotten materials enter my body. All qi cannot be weakened, even though my body catches diseases externally. I become bright and pure, preventing old age and prolonging life. My determination is high on immortality, and my appearance shows no fatigue. The essences and lights of the sun and moon come to attach to my body self, and the 4 seasons and 6 qi come to integrate with my body. I enter the Tao of changes, understand the principle of divinity, and take control of yin and yang, and breathe the subtle spirit. Then the Creator, in turn, is controlled by me. When reaching this stage, I do not need golden elixirs, jade liquids, and the elixirs of Langya and Da Huang, but naturally transform my spirit and rush to the void. My qi integrates with the great harmony and ascends to the clouds. The qi of the 5 viscera twists itself into 5 clouds and ascends to heaven. So we can see here Shangqing influence very clearly. She's distancing herself from external alchemy practices and really focused on this visualization, becoming healthy and sort of independent. She says, you'll get diseases, but it's not going to weaken my qi, and it's going to be not really much of a problem for me. I'll get over it quickly. And it's this fusion of medical practice, medical theory, and spiritual aspiration. So we'll move on to the organ spirits. Most of them are based on the Sixiang. Yeah, the Sixiang, the white tiger, I said phoenix here. It's not really a phoenix, it's a bird. The green dragon and the black turtle with a snake wrapped around it. And what these refer to is 4 quadrants, or 4 constellations, basically. We have in this image if this is divided into the 28 lunar mansions, which is sort of the divisions of the moon as it travels. 7 of each of them are represented by one of these animals. And this and in the center here we have it's meant to be Huangdi, and it's where it's meant to be Huangdi represented in the center, but there in earlier sort of representations it's called the Palace of Purple Tenuity, and there are a few different versions of it going around. What's really interesting is the earliest depictions of these animals, 5300 BC, in Shishuepo Puyang in Henan, there was found this burial site, and we can see we have the white tiger and the green dragon. The green dragon on the east, the white tiger on the west. There are some other animals around here, like a spider, which are obviously a bit weird, but we can see this association goes back a very long way. The human figure in the middle is aligned with the Big Dipper. He is facing north. What is interesting here is we don't have this alignment with the eastern direction, wood on the left and metal on the right, which we'll talk about, we see in Hu Yin's text. Doesn't seem to be at play here. It could be because it's, death, he's facing north, there's an association with death going on, or it's an inversion of some kind, but I think the system probably hadn't really been developed there. There aren't really the other animals at play here. Something that got developed later on. By the Han Dynasty, it was very much in play. And it could have been earlier. There are mentions in like the oracle bones of some of these animal figures in the Shang Dynasty. But this is pretty mind-blowing. Gives you an idea of how long these concepts have been around for, and the fact that they're still around today is pretty incredible. And Hu Yin again says, if I'm able to visualize the spirits, care for and nurture the viscera, restrain myself. Oh, no, it's a different one, sorry. Heaven provides, so we can see that there's I'll skip this one, because we're in the interests of time. We'll look at the influence of these organ spirits, because they were very influential. There are these 2 texts. There are 2 texts at the beginning, which also make an appearance in the Daoist canon, and they also use these images. This is I'll just refer to them as the Classic of Sorcery and the Classic of the Jade Axis. And very similar imagery. There's a bit more explanation. So I'll be drawing on these when we actually look at the organ spirits. I'll be referencing both of those because they explain them in a little bit different detail. We have this one, the diagram of maintaining health according to the 4 qi. This one is very interesting. It's a seasonal kind of Yangsheng text documenting the organ spirits as well. The descriptions are a bit different, and what is interesting, we'll talk about when we talk about the gallbladder, but the Zuncheng Baji and the text which quotes Hu Yin, which I'm studying for my master's, it actually takes from this text the description of the gallbladder, because obviously he was also confused by Hu Yin's classification of the gallbladder, and he decided to take from this text and not Hu Yin's text, probably thinking it gave a better explanation. Yeah, we've mentioned the Zunsheng Bajian, and then we have the 10 Books of Cultivating Perfection, also found in the Dao Zang, quotes entirely from Hu Yin's text, and the Shoujian Tu. This is the diagram of cultivating perfection. Yes, and that's what's pictured here, and we can see the organ spirits, also quotes from the Huangtingjing, around the seated figure here in the middle. So I've mentioned this a few times. These are the images in Hu Yin's text. This is the gallbladder spirit. It's a turtle with a snake wrapped around it. And both these animals have sort of long associations with longevity. Turtles in particular, greatly admired in Taoism. We're in SeaWorld. I was there yesterday. I'd highly recommend you go check out the turtles. It was awesome watching how they swim around and breathe and everything. You can start to understand why they were admired by the Taoists, like how they're breathing. They, go up to the surface, they take a few gulps of air and then sort of come back down to sit. And in these Taoist Yangsheng texts, there's a lot of emphasis on breath holding, like kind of similar to Wim Hof, not as intense, but there's a lot of breath holding going on. And yeah, turtles have the same lungs as us. They've got 2 lungs, big lungs. And it's easy to see why they were sort of admired as a figure of longevity. They also, funnily enough, some of them breathe through their rectums when it gets cold, which is interesting. It's maybe some weird lung-large intestine connection to consider there. But yeah, really interesting. We can see here, this is the Chinese sage Fuxi and Nuwa. On the left, they're often depicted as snakes. This Fuxi, he was taught Chinese writing, said how to hunt, fish, music, cooking, domestication, basically. He's also responsible for the I Ching, is attributed to him. And the story goes, he got it off the back of a turtle on the right. This is coming out of the Law River. This is a depiction of the turtle. There are a lot of snakes in Taoism in general. There's snake temples. There's one in Penang, I think. There's a story in Beijing really interesting where there was in the Olympic Stadium, there was a Taoist temple they were going to get rid of. They were going to demolish because of the Olympics. And when they started digging it up, they found a big pit of snakes under it. And they decided that was a bad omen and they weren't going to demolish it, and it's still there. There's an association there. In the Journey to the West, the King of the North has a snake and a turtle general, and there's this deity Xuanwu who's very big. Xuanwu, which is the name of the organ spirit of the kidneys. Not the gallbladder here, but he's a Taoist deity, and he's very often seen around Wudang. A lot of temples to him around Wudang, and he's depicted with this snake and turtle image. Go back here, because there we go. So this section of the work in Hu Yin's text, in her writings, is different to all the other ones. It's a lot shorter. There are no food recommendations or herbal prescriptions. And the organ in general is described. Descriptions are much shorter, and there are many less relationships documented. The gallbladder held a special place in the Fu organs, and it was called the Purple Palace in Shangqing Taoist practices. So I haven't quite worked out what's going on with it yet, and I've talked to some other people, and no one quite knows what's going on, but it's interesting and it's quite unusual. Here it's paired with the bladder, which I found really interesting. Kidneys are paired with the bones and teeth, and it's said the fu of the kidney is the bladder in the same text, but here it's he is the character used, so unified with the bladder. The visualization exercises are in the 3 months of winter. We have the turtle, which is a water animal. It's the only one of the water animals, and It's associated with the north, which is, you'd think this would be with the kidneys, but it's not. And we're told it's associated with the body hair and the hair on the head. And okay, the hair on the head in the Neijing, there's correspondence with the liver and in the Ling Shu, there's this quote which I put here. It aligns with the Sanjiao and the Pangguang. What is it? Ying. So they. How have I translated that? They kind of, anyway, they relate to the solely the pores of the body and the body hair, and that's in the Ling Shu. So there is a relationship there. There's some sort of association here going on with the water element, but also still the wood element. So it's associated with the winter months, and I think Gao Lian, who wrote the Zunsheng Baijian, found this very confusing as well. He just puts it in with the spring months and doesn't pay attention to this. It also relates to the liver. We're told, it does relate to the liver. They've got the same pathway and this kind of thing. So it's pretty interesting. We're also told in these other two books, the Classic of Sorcery and the Classic of the Jade Axis, in order to nourish this spirit, we should avoid debating and arguing with people. Maybe that's some good advice to anyone very active on the Facebook comments or YouTube comments out there. If you want to nourish these spirits, maybe don't get in any big blow-ups online. We'll move. This is a picture of my Daoist teacher, the abbot of the Five Immortals Temple. This was when we, there was this guy selling all these turtles, and obviously someone took pity on them, and they ended up at the temple because they were obviously going to be eaten. And there was a whole group of them. They all ended up at the temple. It's pretty cool. So the gallbladder itself was first mentioned in this text, the Hanshe Waizhuan. It's a Han Dynasty text. And it talks about it being the fu of accumulated jing. And sorry, I've got the wrong character. Oh no, that's, fu of accumulated jing. And we have a similar, we're told the gallbladder is the fu of the central essence, the central jing. And again, so it's there's this association with jing going on, which there's people always talk about bile. It's always a bile association with the gallbladder, and I never quite figured it out, but when I really started thinking about it when I was reading this text, and I couldn't get it for ages. Like, why is it connected with the water element? What's going on? There's a guy who published a book through Purple Cloud, Will Savels, and I asked him, because he'd done a lot of work on the gallbladder in that book. I go, what do you think's going on here? And I need to thank him for this, because he pointed me to this theory that there's a homonym going on. So the Chinese word for gallbladder is dan, third tone, and then dan means egg. And egg is often used referring to the testicles, which is really interesting. So there's a theory that there may be something going on here between maybe they were separated at some stage. There was a very clear alignment of testicles and gallbladder, and later someone became confused and they became sort of brought together. It's interesting that when we think of the 6 extraordinary organs, the gallbladder is a bit weird because it's the only one that's also a full organ. And we do have female reproductive organs. We have the uterus in there, but no male reproductive organs. So it's possible that was meant in its original context, and it's kind of been lost. Now, Hu Yin was a female, obviously. So she did not have testicles. So we don't know. I don't really know what she was talking about. But big question mark around that, but stuff to consider. Very interesting. This is the spleen spirit. It's a phoenix is depicted here. Phoenix was in China, became a female entity. These are two images of phoenixes. Originally, it was, you had the Feng and Huang. Feng and Huang were, Feng Huang is a phoenix, but there were originally two separate birds, the Feng being male and the Huang being female. But later on, and there was sort of a representation of a male-female relationship, but later on, by the Qin and Han dynasties, it was very much a feminine symbol, and it was often contrasted with the dragon, which was a very young male symbol. Go back. Yeah, the classic of sorcery tells us in order to calm this spirit, we should control sexual desire. And the jade axis tells us we shouldn't think too much, which is obvious. The sexual desire thing is interesting. And they both tell us that jealousy and these feelings relate to the spleen and grow from the spleen. This is one of the things that really interests me is in the Daoist text, there's all this stuff about our conduct, our behavior, our morality, and how this relates to our health. And I really like this. It's also, we got to realize there was no psychology back then. There was no Sigmund Freud. There was no Carl Jung. There was none of this stuff. So often these are the kind of areas these guys were dealing with. And I find that it can fill in a lot of gaps in our Chinese medical practice, this way of thinking. Reading these Daoist texts, reading these religious texts, because they did fill that role in society at that time. The kidney spirit, two-headed deer. And this was quite interesting. The deer is also often associated with longevity. We're told in the text, we'll go ahead and have a look. This is a deer that showed up at the temple one day, spent a bit of time there. Pretty cute. This is Shangqing, one of the Sanxing, the 3-star deities, who's associated with longevity. And he's often accompanied by a deer. He's got a peach of immortality in his hand. And on the left here, this is a Korean text from the 15th century. And you can see that this two-headed deer is still very influential at this time. So, what it talks about, we're mentioned in the kidneys that we have this Nanjing kind of classification of the kidneys with, the young kidney, the Mingmen being on the right, and the left kidney, the yin being on the left. We also have an association with the navel at the front of the body. And it's related, we're told it's related to obedience and, the kidneys being fundamental to the prenatal quality of life and the root of life. Their health is fundamental to longevity. We're told to help this spirit be calm, we need to be kind-hearted and gentle. So there are images of a deer, right? This is kind of how a deer behaves. So this is what I mean by this kind of metaphorical, symbolic classification going on here. And if one increases one's essence and puts one's will into order, then this will provide the completion of the physical form. This is the liver spirit related to a dragon. I mean, we could talk about a dragon. It needs its own lecture, really. We could talk about that forever, related to China. It's really had imperial associations, and they were often told to control the weather and the sky and this kind of thing. This one on the right here, this is a super old depiction of a dragon. I think it's 4,000 BC. The one on the upper left is Zhou from the Zhou dynasty, and so is this silk print on the lower one. They really go back a long time, these sort of dragon images. And we're told what's interesting here is we're told in Hu Yin's text, the liver is born on the left. We'll see the lung in a bit, which is on the right. We're told when the liver has an illness, there's a pulsation on the left side of a navel. And when the liver has heat, the left cheek will get very red, which is pretty interesting. And it's related to benevolence and kind-heartedness. Here's, the lung spirit. So it's not a white tiger here. It looks to me like a lion, or it could be. In one of the texts, it's called the beast, a white beast, which is what I've written here. But, it's very probably influenced by a white tiger, but could be a white tiger. No one's really sure. It looks more like a lion to me. The jade axis, in classic of jade axis, it's called the beast. It's associated, interesting, with anger and fury, and you can see this quality in a tiger, right? It's something you want to kind of keep calm, and that's what we're told. We want to keep calm to nourish the lungs. So a little bit different to the Neijing here. We're told to, control our desires and avoid anger. It's the root of qi in the body, and again, we're told it's born on the right side of the body. So this idea of the wood qi coming up on the left side and the metal qi descending on the right-hand side of the body is very much in play here. Similar thing, right cheek will get red in lung heat, and the pulsation on the right side of the navel in lung illness. Go back. And this is the heart spirit, the red bird, Zhu Cue. The heart is classified as, it's classified as the root of life, and it's told to be very flighty. And if we imagine someone nervous, unsettled, easily startled, restless, we can imagine this sort of flighty bird sort of flittering and flying away, and this kind of imagery is very much present in the bird and related to the heart. And we're told to be filial, loyal, kind-hearted again, and calm and stable in order to nourish this organ. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.